were quite popular and cool. So what's your point?
Yeah, no, good point. Yeah. What's that?
What?
Drew came in at a bad time.
You're
Welcome to episode 78 of Farm to Markets. This is the show where participants only get 5 minutes to state their opinions, and the person with the most time at the end wins, but there are no prizes. Today we are talking about de-dollarization. If Bud Light is really for you, the weight loss industry, asking people about their jobs, and ageism against kids. China and Brazil have reached a deal to carry out trade and financial transactions directly in the Chinese yuan or Brazilian reals, instead of using US dollars as an intermediary. BRIC nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, are also reportedly working on developing their own currency to be used to settle transactions without the US dollar. Some worry this will cause the US to lose global reserve currency status, causing the dollar to sink and interest rates to soar. What do you think will happen?
So I've written about this a little bit, talked about it a little bit in various forms. I think this has been coming for a while. The geopolitics people have been talking about this for over a decade, and what's happening is slowly and steadily, as the Cold War alliance continues to realize that the foe that they were aligned against no longer really exists, they're increasingly, little by little, starting to act in their own interests and less in ways that necessarily the United States wants. That's not necessarily a good or a bad thing for them anyways, but it's not going to be great for our currency unless we start preparing for the end of universal dollar dominance. I don't think that the end of the dollar's dominance is imminent. I think it's still probably years and years away. But again, nations are increasingly doing what's in their own interests. And rightly or wrongly, that means they're looking at currency policy in a very different light from what they were 30 years ago. Countries that are increasingly trying to get out of the United States shadow, your Chinas, your Russias, they're looking at the dollar reserve currency system as leverage against them. They're looking at like what's happened to Russia and saying, if the United States gets mad at me for some reason, all of a sudden I'm locked out of the global economy, or a large segment of it anyways. So what this is showing is that countries increasingly want to get away from that risk. It used to be more carrot. In other words, so the United States would say, hey, look, we're going to make it easy for you to facilitate trade through currency policy. You don't have to stockpile 55 different currencies. You can only stockpile one. But now it's more and more stick, where it's do what we say or we lock you out of the global financial system. So I don't think countries are going to go back to the idea that there's zero risk with a dollar financial system, dollar-based financial system. So I think we should expect to see more and more of this, but it's not going to be a short-term, light switch kind of thing where one day you're going to wake up, in a month and nobody's going to use the dollar anymore. It'll be years long, but I think it's coming that the dollar's days are numbered as the sole global currency.
So what do I think is going to happen with these BRIC countries ditching the dollar and using their own? I think I'd rather address the concerns of what I hear and kind of the headlines that I see, and that is it's pretty much the collapse of the US dollar as we know it. Do I think it is the end of the US dollar? No. Could it be the start of a period of decline? Sure, but I think that's unlikely too. If you look at history, the world reserve currencies, they change. Since about 1921, the US dollar has been the world reserve currency. But before that, it was the Great Britain pound. Before that, it was the French franc. And it doesn't happen abruptly. There's these periods where countries and their currencies rise, they hit the peak, and then they start to decline. So could this be the start of a decline where another country replaces the US dollar as the world currency? Sure, that's possible. I'll entertain that. Now, I like being in a country that has the world dominant currency. There's a lot of great benefits. It gives the dollar extra stability, which currency needs. It makes the U.S. an investment powerhouse by attracting other countries to invest in our U.S. government debt. It makes the U.S. What do they call it? The petrodollar. Where oil exporters settle all oil trades in the U.S. dollar, which is also good for us, I suppose. But all those things aside, philosophically, I also believe that if another country can do a better job at maintaining and managing a reputable world currency, then they have every right to give it a try. And if they succeed, then that's good for everyone. Now, all these articles out there are saying the dollar is dead and it's being ditched or replaced. But the truth is the dollar is extremely strong relative to every currency out there, and it's only been getting stronger. Now, I might steal your thunder a bit, Dad. I know you've used this analogy before, but it's like the analogy of ditching a leaky boat for a piece of driftwood. And that's kind of what ditching the US dollar looks like right now. So, yeah, I think the dollar is fine. It's still strong. Could it be declining? Maybe.
I'm going to pretty much echo what Drew said, that the US dollar does not have to be perfect. It just has to be better than everybody else in the world. And currently, that's the case. We're paying a relatively high interest rate on our 10-year treasuries, which means when you have lots and lots of American dollars floating around in the rest of the world, that these people are going to turn around and take those dollars and they're going to give it right back to the United States to buy treasury bonds, because we're paying an attractive yield and we have a strong economy and we have a pretty resilient government. Even in these BRICS countries like Brazil and Russia and India, China and South Africa, they can say all they want about using some other alternative form of currencies for their trades. But if you go walking through the marketplaces, every one of those places is going to be swimming with American dollars, because at the end of the day, they're going to be using American dollars because it is way, way safer than any currency that these BRIC companies are going to use to trade amongst themselves. So I don't see us losing our dominance in the world. If a few outliers want to, try something different, salute them with both hands and let them go. As for me, the way I protect myself is I avoid debt, because if the dollar stops being dominant, the people who are going to get hurt the most are those who use debt to try to get wealthy.
Yeah, I think all this works out in theory, but I think there's a few problems, especially for China and Russia. For China, if they want, if they're saying that the yuan is going to be the next reserve or the next global currency, China's going to have to relinquish their tight control over the currency, because if they're not willing to do that, you're probably not going to have the yuan as the next global reserve currency. And the same thing for Russia. Russia will not want the yuan to be the global reserve currency, because their idea would be to not, instead of being controlled by the US, now they're going to be controlled by China. So the Russians would want some other form of currency other than the yuan to be the next global reserve currency. And maybe the BRIC nations get together and form their own currency. But just like you said, is that everybody else has problems too. I mean, the US certainly has problems, but nobody is so much better than the U.S. right now that their concerns that their currency would rise above the dollar. And I think at some point there could be some change, and the pound lost its global reserve status. I think Drew said in 1921, and the world was fine. So I think if the dollar loses its global reserve status, things will be just fine for everybody. All right, Anheuser-Busch InBev stock took a slight dip on Monday in the wake of countering backlash over the news that one of the brewing company's brands has a partnership with a transgender influencer and activist named Dylan Mulvaney. Do you think Anheuser-Busch's partnership with Dylan Mulvaney will pay off for the company, or do you think they will actually go broke, as some conservatives hope that they will?
Get woke, go broke is still mostly a meme. It doesn't work. The boycotts don't last very long, and any financial problems created for these companies are pretty short-lived. Just look at like Gillette or Dick's Sporting Goods. There's a couple of high-profile examples. People mostly seem to have the memory span of a goldfish, so this is going to blow over. I don't expect Anheuser-Busch to experience any long-term problems specifically related to this particular boycott. So no, they're not going to go broke.
I agree with Alex. This is just another company. They did something woke and they got harsh backlash immediately after the fact. It was a 3% decline, which really isn't that bad. And Anheuser-Busch is up 7.8% year to date anyway. So most folks will forget about this and continue to drink Anheuser-Busch products. Alex named a couple, just to name a few of these companies that went woke and didn't go broke. You have Keurig, Carhartt, Disney. Well, Disney's not really, yeah, they went woke a little bit. Amazon, Nike, they all did things that ruffled the feathers of the anti-woke, but everyone forgot about it, and business has been fine for them. So I think Anheuser-Busch will be just fine.
I think all of you have been with Cocoa Enterprises long enough to remember when our primary research platform used to not have the ESG scores in their stock analysis, but now they do. The fact is that Anheuser-Busch did not just willy-nilly make this move towards Dylan Mulvaney on their own. It's that they were feeling extreme pressure from the financial markets that you better get a high environmental, social justice, and governance score, or we're going to make it very, very difficult for you to have entry into the financial markets. So what they lose from doing things like giving a select line of beer to Dylan Mulvaney so he can get a little self-adulation on social media is a small price compared to what they could lose if they lose access to BlackRock and Vanguard and some of these other Wall Street powerhouses who will shut the door for them getting financing in the future. So I think it was a strategic play, not of their own making, but I think their hand was kind of forced. This is where it's kind of neat being a small business, is that we can afford to avoid a lot of this woke stuff that large Fortune 500 companies can't.
Yeah, and they can get away with it because they get a little bit of backlash, like a minor 3% dip in their stock price, but ultimately the anti-woke supporters, or conservative supporters, they won't carry through on a boycott to actually hurt the company. So the company just takes a minor hit right at the beginning, and then they don't have to put up with cancel culture and not being able to have access to BlackRock and all that kind of stuff. If the anti-woke crowd actually wants to make this hurt, I mean, they need to actually boycott Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch to make it work. Otherwise, companies are just doing the calculations in their head, being like, we take minor backlash from our base, and we don't have to put up with all the woke, cancel culture, all that kind of stuff. All right, so weight loss business, which long pushed calorie counting and willpower, are now grappling with the surging popularity of new weight loss drugs that are upending the weight loss industry. Drugs such as Ozempic, Wegovy, and I had trouble saying this one, Mounjaro. Sorry, it's Mounjaro. Are shaping up to be blockbusters for Eli Lilly and some of these other drug companies. For weight loss companies, the question is now whether to embrace the drug, stick with pushing diets and lifestyle changes, or find some middle ground. How do you think these drugs are going to impact the weight loss industry?
So far, Will, we talked about a similar subject a few weeks ago, I think, and in briefly looking up these drugs, they seem to be pretty much on the same page as the stuff we were talking about before. They supplement diet and exercise. A couple of them aren't even rated for weight loss. It's just a happy accident. I think they're diabetes control medications. For now, I don't see them as the mythical exercise pill that lets you basically sit on the couch and stuff your face while also losing weight. So I think for now, minimal. Maybe in the future, some new drug will change the game, though.
I think it'll have the same impact as like what Kindle did for publishing companies. It'll probably be best for these weight loss companies just to put this new medication strategy in their quiver instead of rejecting it completely, if that's what the change is showing. Now, there's medical reasons for obesity, but as a country, the two main reasons for our high average obesity is too much food and too little exercise. Both of these things are pretty cheap and very accessible. I would rather see a push for that if we were going to do anything. Drugs and weight loss programs are expensive. So I think it'd be a win-win-win to do the former. Now, my question and concern is who's going to pay for this? Drugs are expensive. Is this going to be included in private healthcare? Is this going to be government subsidized? Because I would rather see a lot of other strategies exhausted first before we go on and do something like that.
I think what we're going to experience is that if there's enough voter support for these sorts of drugs, everybody who only does exercise and calorie counting is going to end up paying for these drugs and subsidize their price through higher taxes. Because essentially, we all know that you can lose weight if you exercise and watch what you eat. This is just an easy way to get to the same thing that ultimately will just shave years off your life for taking drugs you probably ought not to be taking. But the rest of us are going to pay for it if there's enough voter support for it. We've already crossed the Rubicon with Social Security, Medicare, and Obamacare. So now it's just a matter of just load the boat. You know, every other malady out there, we'll just get the government to pay for it, which means we all pay for it. And we'll be just like the Europeans who we make decent incomes, but it all goes out in taxes, so we don't ever get ahead.
They are expensive. I would get, ideally, I think these were made just for people who have tried everything, have legitimate problems, and need kind of a head start, because the idea is that it makes you less hungry, I guess. So, I would hope that they just be used in those cases. And yeah, I don't really want to start paying for all the stuff with my health insurance, but yeah, ideally, they should just be used for cases where you've tried everything for whatever reason. You actually there's something going on where you're unable to lose the weight, and you kind of use this to kind of get you through the hurdle where you're on your way to losing weight, and then you get off of it, because the long-term effects of these are unknown. So I don't know I don't know how popular they're going to be, at least starting out, because I think there's still some people are still cautious about drugs because they especially when you don't know the long-term side effects. So I don't think the weight loss industry is going to take a huge hit right away. All right. So the Wall Street Journal ran an article that said you should not ask the question, "What do you do for a living?" when you're at parties, soccer games, or other places. Do you, when you're talking, when you're getting to know somebody, do you ask them what they do for a living, or how do you feel about that question?
I've never had an issue with it. I don't think I've ever run into anyone that's been offended by the question either. But I think ultimately it's just an answer of reading social cues. If it sounds like somebody doesn't want to talk about it, then just don't push the issue. And if they're okay talking about it, then it's an easy icebreaker. So I don't have an issue asking it, but again, just read the social cues and see where they go from there.
In social settings, I usually like to talk about what people's interests are, but I've never had a problem with what you do for a living. The way I see it is, unless you're Harry and Lloyd from Dumb and Dumber, most American households have at least one member working 40 or 50 hours a week. You spend a lot of your time doing that. I don't see what's wrong with talking about it.
I'm very interested when I meet new people to learn what they do with 33% of their day or 50% of their waking hours. I'm not going to avoid it. I think you'll learn more about who a person is by what they do. I'm not afraid to ask the question.
I don't care either. In fact, I like the question. I like finding out what people do. I think it's interesting. I think jobs are interesting, and you spend most of your waking hours at your job, or at least some people do. So I mean, if there's if you're gonna have something interesting to say, it's gonna be what you do for a profession. So I have no problem with it. Yeah, I like it when people ask a question.
Some spend their sleeping hours at their job too.
Yeah.
which we talked about before.
Yeah. Yep. All right. And so a restaurant in New Jersey has made the decision to ban children under the age of 10. Do you think this is age discrimination?
Well, technically it is age discrimination. Society tends to dislike discrimination based on things out of your control, like your sex or your race, that kind of thing. But seems to be more tolerant of things in your control, like what religious beliefs or political affiliation you have. Age is one of those things that you don't have any control over. So if it's illegal to not hire somebody because they're too old, I'm curious to see what the courts would have to say as to whether or not it's illegal to say, no, I won't serve someone based on their age.
So it's interesting you say that, Alex. I thought the same thing, but I did some research. So the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Americans with Disability Acts, basically it gives leeway for businesses to set their own rules and refuse service. They're only permitted to discriminate, or they cannot discriminate based on race, religion, national origin, or disability. Age is not a protected class, so they actually have every right to refuse service based on age. Now, age in the employment is protected by the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. So you can't not hire someone based on their age, but you have every right to refuse service in a restaurant based on someone's age. Should they have the right to do so? 100%. That's their business. They'll either be rewarded for it or hurt for it, and they'll have to deal with that.
If 10-year-olds could vote, the answer would be yes, that somehow they would find their way into being a protected class and they would be discriminated against. But the fact that they can't vote, like babies in the womb, they can't be discriminated against under our system. Only voters can be discriminated against.
I absolutely think kids should be discriminated against in restaurants. I have 3, so I feel like I can speak for them. But yeah, I mean, if you have a nice restaurant where you have a certain atmosphere, I don't think people should tell you how you're going to run your business or the people that you want to serve. That's fine with me. And yeah, if you want to kick kids out, that's fine with me.
I'll tell you, and I'll use some of my time for this. I got a few seconds left. Is that I would love to see people discriminated against who are talking on their cell phone in a restaurant. They're more obnoxious than kids to me.
Can I have some of your time to respond? Well, there's a restaurant in Japan that recently did that. They banned cell phones in their restaurant because if you're on your cell phone, you're waiting too long, the ramen noodles get weird and you destroy the experience of the ramen. So that's I think they should ban cell phones too if they want.
How is talking on a cell phone any different than talking to somebody across from you? Like, can't you eat your ramen while you're on your cell phone? Like, and is the noise any louder?
That sounds tough. If you're looking down, I don't know if you can put noodles in your mouth while, they'd be like dripping on the screen. It'd be a mess. I think people can't multitask in that sense.
Oh, so it's just being on your phone. It's not necessarily having a conversation on the phone is what you're getting.
Correct. Yeah, they're scrolling through social media. They're doing whatever they do on they're looking down and they're killing time when they should be eating ramen noodles.
For the record, Drew has used up about 45 of my seconds, which actually makes Tom the default winner if he doesn't talk too long.
I declared myself the unequivocal winner about 3 minutes ago, so I don't think there's any danger of that here. So, all right, well that's it for episode 78 of Farm to Markets. We'll do this again next week.